What happens when two of country music's biggest icons sit down for what should be a lighthearted interview, and it turns into one of the most uncomfortable moments in daytime television history? You're about to find out, because Faith Hill's appearance on Kelly Clarkson's show went completely off the rails in a way nobody saw coming. Before we get into exactly what was said that made things explode, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below telling me which side you're on after you hear this whole thing. Trust me, you're going to have an opinion. The energy in the studio that afternoon seemed normal at first. Kelly came out with her usual bright smile. The audience was buzzing with excitement, and Faith walked onto the stage looking absolutely stunning in a cream-colored blazer and jeans. The two women hugged, they sat down, and Kelly started the way she always does, with some light banter about Faith's latest projects. Faith had just wrapped up a series of performances and was talking about how incredible it felt to be back on stage after taking some time away. Kelly was nodding along, laughing at the right moments, and everything seemed perfectly pleasant. Then Kelly shifted gears. She brought up Faith's career longevity, how she'd managed to stay relevant in an industry that's notoriously tough on women, especially as they get older. It was meant to be a compliment, but you could see something flicker across Faith's face. She smiled, but it was tight. She thanked Kelly for the kind words, then said something that caught everyone off guard. She said that relevance isn't something she thinks about, because real artistry doesn't have an expiration date. The way she said it, there was an edge to it. Kelly laughed, thinking it was just Faith being modest, and she pushed a little further. Kelly mentioned how she admired Faith for reinventing herself over the years, for changing with the times and adapting to what audiences wanted. That's when Faith's posture changed. She sat up straighter, and her smile disappeared completely. She said she's never reinvented herself. She's always been exactly who she is, and she's never changed her music to fit what's trendy. The temperature in the room dropped. You could feel it through the screen. Kelly tried to backtrack, saying that's not what she meant, but Faith wasn't having it. Faith said that maybe Kelly didn't mean it that way, but that's how it sounded. And it's exactly the kind of thing women in this industry are tired of hearing. She said that men get to age gracefully and be called legends, while women get asked how they stay relevant, like they're constantly on the verge of being forgotten. Kelly's face went from confused to defensive. She said she wasn't trying to insult Faith, she was trying to celebrate her, and that Faith was reading way too much into a simple compliment. Faith shot back that it wasn't a compliment, it was a backhanded comment wrapped in nice words, and she's been in this business long enough to know the difference. You could hear people shifting in their seats, unsure of whether this was some kind of bit or if it was actually happening. Kelly looked at her producers off camera, like she was hoping someone would jump in and save her, but nobody did. She turned back to Faith and said that she respects Faith's career immensely, but that Faith was being overly sensitive about something that wasn't meant to be offensive. That was the match that lit the fuse. Faith leaned forward, her voice calm but ice-cold, and said that calling a woman sensitive when she pushes back is the oldest trick in the book. She said Kelly should know better, especially as someone who's been in the spotlight herself and has faced her own share of criticism. Kelly's jaw tightened. She said she wasn't calling Faith sensitive as an insult. She was just pointing out that Faith seemed to be looking for a fight where there wasn't one. Faith laughed, but it wasn't a friendly laugh. She said she wasn't looking for a fight, but she wasn't going to sit there and be patronized either. Kelly said she wasn't patronizing anyone, and that Faith was twisting her words to make her seem like the bad guy when all she'd done was try to have a nice conversation. Faith said that if Kelly really thought the conversation was nice, then maybe she should listen to how she talks to her guests, because it didn't feel nice on the receiving end. Kelly's voice got louder. She said she's been doing this show for years. She's interviewed hundreds of people, and nobody has ever accused her of being disrespectful. Faith didn't miss a beat. She said that maybe nobody's called it out before, but that doesn't mean it hasn't been there. The tension was suffocating. Kelly took a deep breath, clearly trying to regain control of the situation, and said that maybe they should just move on to another topic. Faith said she was fine with that, but her tone made it clear she wasn't backing down from what she'd said. Kelly asked about Faith's family, about her daughters, and what they were up to. It seemed like a safe topic, a way to steer things back to normal. But Faith wasn't letting it go that easily. Faith answered the question about her daughters, but her answers were clipped, shorter than they would normally be. Kelly kept trying to inject warmth back into the conversation, asking follow-up questions, laughing a little too enthusiastically at things that weren't that funny. But the damage was done, and everyone could feel it. Then Kelly made another mistake. She brought up Tim McGraw, Faith's husband, and said something about how lucky Faith was to have such a supportive partner who understood the demands of the industry. Faith's eyes narrowed. She said she wasn't lucky. She was married to someone who respects her as an equal, and that luck had nothing to do with it. She said, women are always told they're lucky when they have supportive husbands, but men are never told they're lucky to have supportive wives. They're just expected to have them. Kelly tried to laugh it off, saying Faith was really reading into things today, and that she clearly woke up on the wrong side of the bed. The second those words left Kelly's mouth, you could see she regretted them. Faith's expression went from annoyed to genuinely angry. She said that dismissing her valid points by suggesting she's just in a bad mood is exactly the kind of dismissive behavior she was talking about. She said Kelly was proving her point with every word that came out of her mouth. Kelly's face flushed red. She said she wasn't trying to dismiss Faith, but that Faith was being incredibly hostile for no reason, and it was making the interview impossible to continue. Faith said the interview was impossible to continue, not because she was being hostile. Kelly said that challenging someone and being rude are two different things, and that Faith had crossed the line from one to the other. Faith asked where exactly she'd been rude, and Kelly said it was in her tone, in the way she was twisting everything Kelly said into an attack. Faith said she wasn't twisting anything, she was responding to what Kelly actually said. And if Kelly didn't like how it sounded when someone pointed out the problems with her questions, maybe she should ask better questions. The audience was still frozen. Some people looked uncomfortable, some looked fascinated, but nobody was making a sound. Kelly stood up from her chair. She said she didn't think they should continue the interview if Faith was going to keep attacking her for trying to do her job. Faith stood up too. She said she wasn't attacking Kelly, she was defending herself. And if Kelly couldn't tell the difference, that said a lot about how she views these conversations. Kelly said that she views these conversations as opportunities to connect with guests and give them a platform. And that Faith was throwing that back in her face. Faith said a platform isn't a gift if it comes with condescension, and that she didn't need Kelly's platform badly enough to sit there and smile through insults disguised as compliments. Kelly's voice cracked slightly. She said she never insulted Faith, not once, and that Faith was being completely unreasonable. Faith said that just because Kelly didn't intend to insult her doesn't mean she didn't, and that intent isn't the only thing that matters. Kelly said intent is exactly what matters, because without intent, there's no malice, and Faith was acting like Kelly had set out to hurt her, when that couldn't be further from the truth. Faith said, impact matters more than intent, and that she was impacted by the things Kelly said regardless of whether Kelly meant them the way they came across. Kelly threw her hands up. She said she didn't know what Faith wanted from her, that she'd tried to apologize, tried to move on, and Faith wouldn't let it go. Faith said she never heard an actual apology. What she heard was excuses and defensiveness. Kelly said she didn't mean to offend Faith multiple times. And if that's not an apology, then she doesn't know what is. Faith said an apology acknowledges wrongdoing. It doesn't just say, sorry you feel that way. She said Kelly hadn't once said that her questions were poorly phrased, or that she understood why Faith was upset. All Kelly had done was defend herself and act like Faith was the problem. Kelly said Faith was the problem, at least in this moment, because she came onto the show with an agenda and was determined to be offended no matter what Kelly said. Faith's voice rose for the first time. She said she didn't have an agenda. She came on the show expecting a respectful conversation, and instead she got talked down to from the first question. Kelly said she wasn't talking down to anyone, and that Faith was projecting her own insecurities onto the interview. The second Kelly said the word insecurities, the air left the room. Faith went very still. She said she couldn't believe Kelly just said that she just tried to psychoanalyze her on national television as a way to discredit her. Kelly said she wasn't trying to discredit Faith. She was trying to make sense of why Faith was being so defensive. Faith said she was defensive because she was being attacked, and now Kelly was trying to make it seem like it was all in her head. Kelly said it was partly in Faith's head. That Faith was turning a normal interview into a battle because she wanted to make a point about something, and Kelly just happened to be the person in the line of fire. Faith said if Kelly really thought her questions were normal, then she has a lot to learn about how to talk to women without diminishing them. Kelly said she's a woman too, and she doesn't go around feeling diminished every time someone asks her a question. So maybe Faith should examine why she's so quick to feel attacked. Faith picked up her purse from beside the chair. She said she wasn't going to sit here and be gaslit into thinking she's overreacting when every woman watching at home knows exactly what just happened. Kelly said that Faith was the one doing the gaslighting, making Kelly out to be some kind of villain when all she'd done was try to have a conversation. Faith said the conversation was over, and she started walking toward the side of the stage. Kelly called after her, saying that walking out just proves she can't handle being disagreed with. Faith stopped and turned around. Faith walked back toward Kelly, not all the way to the chair, but close enough that there was no mistaking her expression. She said that walking away from disrespect isn't proving anything except that she knows her worth, and she's not going to waste another second trying to explain basic decency to someone who's determined not to understand it. Kelly said that Faith was being dramatic, that this entire thing was blown out of proportion, and that if Faith would just sit back down, they could talk through it like adults. Faith said she tried talking through it like an adult, and Kelly responded by telling her she was insecure and in a bad mood, so clearly talking wasn't getting them anywhere. Kelly's producer finally stepped in, asking if they could take a quick break, reset, and try again. Faith looked at the producer and said there was nothing to reset, that the interview was done. Kelly said they had 12 more minutes of airtime to fill, and that Faith had committed to being there for the full segment. Faith said she committed to an interview, not to being insulted, and those are two very different things. Kelly said once again that she hadn't insulted Faith, and that Faith needed to stop saying that like it was a fact, when it was just Faith's interpretation. Faith said her interpretation was the only one that mattered when it came to how she was treated, and that Kelly didn't get to tell her how to feel about the things Kelly said to her. Kelly said feelings aren't the same as facts, and the fact was that she asked normal questions and Faith chose to take them the wrong way. Faith said the way someone receives your words is part of communication. And if Kelly wasn't willing to take responsibility for how her words landed, then she wasn't as good at her job as she thought she was. Kelly's face went red again. She said she's great at her job, which is why she has a successful show and Faith is a guest on it. The audience gasped. Even Kelly looked like she immediately regretted saying it, but it was too late. Faith laughed. A real laugh this time, but one that was filled with disbelief. She said there it is, the real reason Kelly was so defensive. Because she sees herself as the one with the power in this dynamic, and she doesn't like being challenged by someone she thinks should be grateful for the opportunity. Kelly tried to backtrack, saying that's not what she meant, but Faith cut her off. She said it's exactly what Kelly meant, and it explained everything about how this interview had gone from the start. Kelly said she was just pointing out that she works hard on this show and doesn't deserve to be treated like she's some kind of amateur who doesn't know how to conduct an interview. Faith said no one called her an amateur, but maybe if multiple things she said came across as offensive, it was worth examining her approach instead of blaming the person who was offended. Kelly said she wasn't going to examine anything when Faith was the one who turned a perfectly fine interview into a confrontation. Faith said it wasn't perfectly fine. It was uncomfortable from the moment Kelly started asking questions that reduced her career to a conversation about aging and relevance. Kelly said she asks those questions to everyone, that it's part of talking about longevity in the industry, and Faith was making it about gender when it wasn't. Faith said it absolutely was about gender, because Kelly doesn't ask men how they stay relevant, she asks them about their legacy. Kelly said that's not true, and Faith said it was completely true. That anyone could go back and watch Kelly's interviews with male guests and see the difference in how she frames the questions. Kelly said Faith was welcome to do that research if she wanted to waste her time. But it wouldn't change the fact that Faith came on the show looking for a problem. Faith said she came on the show expecting professionalism and got something else entirely. Kelly said if Faith thought this was unprofessional, she should try interviewing people who actually make her job difficult instead of complaining about softball questions. Faith said the questions weren't softball, they were loaded. And the fact that Kelly couldn't see that was the whole problem. Kelly said the problem was that Faith had an agenda, and she was using Kelly's show to make some kind of statement about how women are treated in the industry, Faith said she didn't need to use Kelly's show for anything. She has her own platform, her own voice, and she's spent decades building a career that speaks for itself. She said the only statement being made here was Kelly's, and it was a statement about how she handles criticism, which is poorly. Kelly said she handles criticism fine when it's valid, but what Faith was doing wasn't criticism, it was an attack. Faith said it was only an attack if Kelly felt attacked. And maybe that feeling was worth paying attention to. Instead of deflecting, Kelly said she wasn't deflecting. She was defending herself against someone who walked into her studio with a chip on her shoulder. Faith said the only chip she had was the one Kelly put there with her condescending questions and dismissive responses. Kelly looked at the audience, as if hoping they'd back her up, but the audience just stared back in stunned silence. She turned back to Faith and said that clearly they weren't going to agree on what happened here, so maybe it was best if they just ended it. Faith said that was the first reasonable thing Kelly had said in the last 20 minutes. She adjusted her purse on her shoulder and started walking toward the exit again. Kelly called after her one more time, saying that she hoped Faith would think about how she handled this and maybe reach out later to talk it through. Faith stopped at the edge of the stage and turned back one last time. She said she'd handled it just fine, and if Kelly wanted to talk later, she knew where to find her. But Faith wasn't holding her breath. Then Faith walked off the stage, through the side exit, and disappeared from view. Kelly stood there for a moment, looking shell-shocked, before turning to the audience and trying to laugh it off. She said something about how interviews don't always go as planned. But her voice was shaking, and nobody was laughing with her. The cameras cut to commercial, and that was it. The segment ended. The show moved on to the next guest, but the damage was already done. What was supposed to be a friendly conversation between two successful women turned into a masterclass in miscommunication, defensiveness, and the different ways people can experience the same interaction. So now you've heard the whole thing. Was Faith overreacting, or did Kelly actually cross a line with her questions? Was Kelly genuinely trying to compliment Faith, or were there underlying issues in how she framed the conversation? Make sure you subscribe to the channel and drop a comment below. Tell me, who do you think was in the wrong here? And what would you have done differently if you were in either of their positions?